Listeners, think of someone from the silent generation or the baby boomer generation. Ooh, let me be more specific. Think of a woman from the silent generation or the baby boomer generation. What is your understanding? What is your descriptors as you think about that person? Today we are going to gain some new awareness, so come on in and join us. I am so excited. I am here today with Miss Darlene. So I'm going to have her just introduce herself a little bit so we get to know her before we dive in. Miss Darlene, tell myself, the listeners, a little about who you are.
Well, I have to explain that Jody is my new neighbor, new as in 2 years about, and we've gotten to know each other, and she told me a little bit about her projects and asked if I would like to be on a podcast as talking about my silent generation. I was born in 1945, the very end of the war, and Jody charmed me enough to say yes to this, and then I thought, what did I do? But I'm so glad, I think I'm glad that it's made me really think about years past and talk to friends. Did you feel the same way? Do you feel the same way?
That's awesome.
So it's opened up a lot of memories and thoughts. And
that's awesome. And let's be clear, when it comes to charming, it was Miss Darlene. You're going to find out she is just so charming herself. So that's why I'm like, girl, you got to be on the podcast because March is Women's Month. And I didn't even know that. I'll be the first to tell you. One of my friends told me, and I'm like, get out of here. Didn't know we had a month. And so I thought, oh, this is a great time to look at not just women, I'm a woman, I fit that, but women from a generation. Now, I'm Gen X. As listeners know, a lot of times because I grew up in the rural, I'm very much Gen X, but I also have some characteristics of baby boomer. And I think that's because I grew up in the rural. But I wanted to have Miss Darlene on to give us some understanding, the deeper understanding of what it was like to be a woman from the silent generation and close to the baby boomer generation, because it's very different. So, Miss Darlene, why don't you just take us back? What was it like growing up, and what are some of the things you experienced along your life's journey?
okay, well, I'm rural too.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
Rural Iowa.
We're not going to hold that against you
Yeah.
if you're from Minnesota. We're
Yeah.
still going to love her.
So
Continue
rural
on.
Iowa, and I know there's a little Iowa-Minnesota thing,
Yeah.
but maybe rightfully so, but I've lived in Minnesota longer than Iowa, and there is something about the place where you were born or grew up. There's something that seeps into your soul.
Absolutely.
From that. Don't you feel that
Yes,
way too when
absolutely.
you go back? And even during the pandemic, I just wanted to be on the farm and be a little girl again. But anyway, I was the fourth girl in our family. And you know, for a farmer, it's a lot of girls.
Yeah.
And then my brother was born 4 years after me. So there were 5 of us kids. And our life was kind of simple. We all had chores on the farm. And it was school was the big thing, and church, and then family and community. So I remember when I got on the bus the first day of kindergarten, and we had kindergarten all day back then because those farmers weren't paying for 2 buses to go on the same route.
So, that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. So, and I finally got to get on the bus with my sisters, and that was a big day. And when I think of our elementary school, the girls, there was no written dress code, but you had to wear a dress.
Isn't that something?
Every day, and then in the cold winter, you took your jeans along to wear under your dress for recess. So in the cloakroom, we hanged up our dresses and put our jeans on
So
to
the
go out.
expectation, the proper wear for a girl was to wear a
Oh,
dress.
yeah, that's it, every day, yes. And we must have been kind of cold.
I would think.
Because we didn't have tights or whatever. And I think in that growing up, you were supposed to be a good girl. And the teacher, you know, now parents will go in and talk to the teacher about what they don't like, and you didn't do that. The teacher was right, and if the teacher criticized your kid was wrong. So we had to obey and respect our teachers.
There was no going home to complain about the teacher or what the school was doing. Because your parents would side with the teacher.
Absolutely.
They had the authority.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and when I think back to that day, we didn't question how anything was. We just accepted everything around us. And I think we were a little tribal, and we were judgmental. And you know, well, you know farming.
Yes.
But you took your Sunday drive and you talked about if that guy could plant a straight.
His field had a weed in it, you know, hey ho. He's not taking care of business.
Right, right.
And I am laughing because I know any listener right now who's ever moved into a rural area in the Midwest is like, oh, you guys are a little bit more than judgmental and tribal. Because to this day, my mom, we will be talking about somebody who's lived in our community for 30 years out in the rural, lived there for 30 years, but as we're talking about them, Mom will be like, well, you know, she's not from here. And I'm like, Mom, she's lived here for 30 years.
Yeah,
well, unless you can go back 4 generations, you're not from here.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
Yes. So very tribal. And I also hear the conforming, that there was just an expectation and you were to conform to it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
In dress, in manners, in your hairstyle, in your,
Wow. So as you got older in high school, what are things as a woman that you experienced or didn't get to experience?
Well, okay, I think that, you know, as we grew up, starting 4-H was a big thing in Iowa. And so when you're 10, you can be in 4-H. And so the girls, we had girls 4-H and boys 4-H. And our girls 4-H prepared us to be a homemaker. So 1 year was sewing, which was my favorite. 1 year was cooking, and 1 year was home furnishings, which was my least favorite. But
what is home furnishings?
That would mean you would paint a room or decorate a room or paint some furniture or make some. Yeah.
So real defined job duties or characteristics based on your gender, on your anatomy.
Oh, yes, and to prepare you to be a good homemaker.
Wow. And that when we were preparing for this, that was something, because I was in 4-H too. That was a big thing for us. It was the one time we could get off the farm. But I did not know that there was, because we just had 4-H, and it was boys and girls.
And like the state fair here, but ours was girls and boys.
So interesting.
And then the boys raised livestock. It isn't like you see at the Minnesota State Fair with all of their little different projects. It was livestock. And so if you were a girl and your dad wanted to compete on the livestock scene, you could be in boys 4-H.
Isn't that something?
Yes, but a boy would never even consider being in girls 4-H, of course.
Now, I'm going to say to interrupt you, but for me, see, listeners, I'm bringing this back to the book. So the normalized dominant male, if they didn't have, I assume, a boy to show their livestock,
right,
then we will change the policy and allow girls to
so
show
your daughter,
show it.
Yes,
because it's important that our livestock, because that's your livelihood, gets seen, right? But that normalized dominant, but female not being normalized dominant, we weren't going to break the policies to let our boys, who may love to cook or love to furnish a home, we wouldn't break the policy to allow them into that 4-H.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just that normalized dominant can break the policy if it benefits.
And back in that time, a boy, even if he loved to do those things, would not talk about that.
Wouldn't.
No, that's not.
Because that's outside the tribal.
Yes.
And you got to conform.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah, that's manly. So then that kind of continued into junior high. We had home ec for the girls and industrial arts for the boys. So they learned to use tools and work with wood. No girl could take
You
that
couldn't.
class. No.
See, and that was my favorite, shout out to Mr. Maine, that was my favorite class.
Yes.
I mean, I thrived. I had issues in other classes, but not in shop, and I made some beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
But in your day, I wouldn't even be able to have that
No,
opportunity.
no.
And see, that's
And
things
then-
we forget. So I'm glad we're having this conversation, because that's like, I didn't even think that that was a privilege that I had until you just said that.
Yeah, and then what we did, our curriculum was written before the war, I think. So in our home ec class, we reconstituted dried fruit, which was real exciting. and we hemmed.
I told you she was charming. I told you.
And we hemmed dish towels.
Hemmed dish
Hemmed
towel.
dish towels. So I mean, this was home ec. It didn't bring a lot of enthusiasm about, but that was it. So it kind of started back then. Your track toward domesticity.
Well, towards who you should be and what your role is.
Right,
And it was
yes.
all based on your anatomy. Like, that's what's kind of amazing to me.
Yes,
It's like, oh, well,
yes.
you should learn how to sew and you should have these characteristics because of your anatomy, because this is the role we want you to play in the future.
Exactly.
And I came at a time that I was out in the rural, so we had home ec, but it was boys and girls were in it.
Yes.
You know what
Same.
I mean?
See, you're young enough to be
Yes.
my daughter, and my daughters.
Right. Yeah.
had
so
that
we
too,
still had
yeah.
some of those classes
Yeah.
that I don't even think they have any longer, but it was both for male
Yes,
and female.
yes.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
For-
And then I know one that my mom brings up, because she will tell the granddaughters, you better be happy you are in that sport or enjoy that sport, and because she couldn't be in sports. And the granddaughters look at her like sometimes like, what? And so I think people forget about that. Were you able to be in
Well,
or
you-
they didn't even have sports?
Oh yeah, you all know Iowa girls basketball is more popular than boys. Look at Caitlin Clark, you
Yep.
know. But in my day, all through high school, it was 3-on-3. Does anybody remember that?
I
The
do.
half court, 3 guards, 3 forwards on you, and you didn't cross the line. You
Yep.
played on your half court. Because girls, that would be too hard for them maybe to do all that running back and forth then.
So the 3-on-3 was just for
Girls.
girls.
Yeah, oh,
the
yeah.
half court.
Just girls.
We modified the game.
Yes, for girls.
I didn't know it was. I thought it was just for small schools.
No,
but
just
Just
for girls. And then they always wore these cute little feminine uniforms, and it actually was more popular than boys basketball.
That's so interesting.
But we didn't, and our schools were small too, so I would have loved to be in track. I like to run,
Yeah.
but there was no track for girls. There was softball though, softball and basketball for girls,
In your community,
right, in our schools.
because legally they didn't have to though, because of Title IX didn't come along until.
Oh, there was Title IX, no
Right,
Title IX.
Right.
No
So-
Title IX.
So your community, it was okay to have those things for girls.
Yeah.
With modification, but other communities didn't even have. Like when I talk to some people, they're like, our school didn't allow women to play any sports.
Yeah, that could be, but
Yeah. Interesting.
that was the case for that. And then high school, I'm trying to think what else your goal, you realized more and more, was to be a wife and a mother in high school. So you're working toward that. And so, but you might need to work a little bit. So you had to take typing.
Yeah.
And shorthand. I was pretty good at shorthand, 100 words per minute. I could still do it a little.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So anyway, that was your fallback skill. And a lot of girls in my class, a lot of them went on to be secretaries or maybe bookkeepers or that kind of thing. But and then for other classes, it was a small school. We didn't have I was the only girl in my physics class when we were a senior, and I just took it because otherwise you'd have had to take something kind of nothing, you know. And so I did it, and the only girl, and it worked.
And I am assuming that's because there wasn't a huge emphasis for girls to take the science classes because, again, like you were saying, it was being clear that your role was to be a housekeeper.
Right.
Or a wife in a house,
Yeah.
take care of the house.
Physics and math was a man's field.
A man's field.
A man's
And it's so
field.
interesting that even though the policies have changed and females have access, but how we subtly still do that in today's school systems.
Well, yeah.
We you know, unconsciously almost kind of keep pushing boys or towards the science and that. We still see it, you know, a little more male dominant at times. Yeah, that leftover, even though the policies have changed.
It's not gone.
Yeah,
it's not
that's
gone.
what I'm trying to say. It's not gone. And then the other thing I found interesting when we were talking is if someone got pregnant when they were a teenager.
We did talk about that. Every year there was someone in the high school who got pregnant. There was, and you asked about birth control at that time. Well, nobody told anybody about it, but there were condoms. And of course,
nothing for a woman though.
No, I mean, and nothing. You'd never go to your doctor and ask for help because you shouldn't be doing that. You know, I mean,
right.
Or didn't. So every year there was someone in our class who got pregnant. So. Then he could come back, the guy could come back to school, the father, but the woman could not come back if she wanted to.
Wow.
And I don't know if there were special programs like were developed where you could go and get you could always go to night school or something and get your degree, but I don't know that it happened. And so then that's sort of the end of your life. Your friends aren't going to hang out with the mom. They're doing fun stuff. And so you just kind of have your family. And so that was...
the isolation. And I would think ridicule because you again broke the rules of how we're supposed to conform.
Right.
But it's so interesting to me when you said that the father can come back to high school. Like he can come back to high school, but the mother can't, which I think that's interesting because like that almost puts to me the blame on the woman.
Oh, of course it's her fault.
See, look at you. Yeah, you're like,
of course, she let that happen.
She let that happen.
Even
though she had no way of not, you know, there was no birth control that a woman could control at that time. That is fascinating, and how that still resonates today. Again, we do get rid of policies, you know, to try to make things more equitable, but I call it the residue from that's still out there.
And then the other choice, of course, would be, you know, maybe a guy would refuse to get married, or the parents would be to give the child away for adoption. And there were some instances, I don't think in my school, but I heard about it from other friends where, you know, you went to live with your aunt and wherever for a while and came back alone, and then that baby was given for adoption. Yeah,
so interesting.
So that was one circumstance. And then after high school, not so fewer, maybe a quarter of the girls went to college, and maybe 4 or 5 of us finished. Wow. But a very small high school class, just 38. And in college, can you believe we still had to wear skirts to class the first couple years? Yes.
This is why I came, your generation, between the skirts and conforming, I wouldn't have done well. I wouldn't have done well.
And no, because you're a different generation, you know how, and the people in the class after us knew how to rebel a little bit, but we just took it, and we were supposed to wear dresses, and sometimes we'd have on our cutoff shorts and a trench coat over it, you know, but we basically complied with the rules.
And you couldn't go to college, you couldn't get a degree in anything that my mom would talk about that even if the policy had changed, she said the policies were changing, that you could get some degrees that you didn't have access to, but it wasn't often socially appropriate. Was that experience? There was pressure.
Teacher or a nurse.
Teacher or a nurse, yeah, that's what my mom
Teacher
would
or a
say.
nurse was basically it. And I always wanted to be a nurse and wear that little white cap.
Yeah.
And I'd make little white paper caps. And then I found out what they really had to do, and I decided I'd be a teacher.
The hat wasn't worth it.
Yeah, the hat wasn't worth
So
it.
you did go to college.
So I did go to college, graduated from college, and I am a teacher. And I really, English is always was my favorite subject. So I wanted to be a high school English teacher.
Yep.
And I had a professor who told me I was too small to teach high school and that I'd better teach elementary school. And being the silent generation, that's what I did.
You changed.
That's what I did. But I'll tell you the story about that later. But so went to college, and I had a friend who was very good at statistics, and they told her she could major in business education, but not business.
Wow.
Because
Business was for males.
Yeah, business was.
But she could teach it, be a teacher.
But she could teach business.
And you could be a teacher, but not for high school because of your stature.
Because
you should
I
be in
was
elementary.
Yeah, yes.
That's so interesting. And then your the silent generation, you just
We just
conformed
took
to
it. We just did it. Well, okay.
That's so interesting.
Okay.
This giving me awareness about your generation, like that is so interesting. Because
Yeah.
mine be like, I ain't taking that. Tell me I can't.
Even the class behind us did.
You said started.
They did, and I have always supported. I say I'd support you, Jody, and your rebellion, but back then it was just part of us that okay, gotta.
This is what we do.
Got to do that.
Yeah.
Got to be a good girl still.
Good girls, isn't that something?
Got to be a good girl. And then in the college years, I worked at Iowa State College Extension Service in a steno pool, which Jody didn't know what one was.
I don't.
But you just type up, you listen to the dictabelts.
I've seen it in movies.
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen it in a room full of people just typing.
Just type, that's it. And all the other, I was a summer girl and had some extra jobs like taking mail around. But these were girls working, putting their husbands through college. And Iowa State was a big engineering school, so you would put your husband through college.
It's so fascinating to me that the male's job was to provide for the family, but the female, in order for the male to get to that point, actually supported the male to go to college.
Right, right.
See, women have been running the world this whole time, whether up front or behind. I'm just saying, like that's
my grandkids do observe that. They said, women really do run things.
Oh, that's funny.
They think, but anyway, and then your goal was to get married right after your education. So people got married soon after high school, or soon after college. And I think I told you the story of my friend who was 26. I was her bridesmaid, and at her wedding, I said, "Well, just think, you've gone to Europe, you've done some stuff." And she said, "I would have enjoyed it a lot more if I'd known I was getting married."
Wow.
So that was how.
And her getting married at 26 when we were talking
26
was considered old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost aged out.
Almost aged out.
Almost
Almost
aged out.
aged out at 26.
And so then, as you said, the burden was on the men. They had to support their family. And way back in my young days, people would say of a neighbor, "She has to work," meaning her husband couldn't provide enough for the
But
family.
she had to work was never a compliment.
No.
That was
No.
someone was slipping up.
Yeah, that was slipping up. And I was telling Jody, on a date, the man always paid. You would never offer or split it, and he would never ask you to. I mean, that would be, and so I told Jody, my husband said he had to marry me because he ran out of his 4-H money to pay
love
for.
it was
I was
4-H
always
money.
hungry. I was
You're always-
always hungry. Well, when you got the champion cow, you sold it. You sold cattle. You sold them.
And you made money.
You made money. But anyway, so that was, and then you were supposed to have your children before you were 30.
That's amazing to me.
And I had my third baby, who was just 48 on Sunday.
Congratulations.
It was during the 70s, so it was a little bit of concern about overpopulation. And then I was a little bit over 30 when I had her. And so I thought, oh, didn't conform. I didn't do it right there, but my doctor assured me that we would be good parents, and it was all just fine.
But you were feeling bad or shame.
A little guilty.
A little guilty because you were having a third child.
And it was a little older.
And it was a little older.
Older.
30. Where now so many of women today, we choose not to have kids until over 30.
Oh,
That
yes.
first-
For sure, for sure. So
Yeah.
that is a difference in, so then I taught school after college for elementary, 5th grade and 6th grade and 5th grade. And if I had taught, and our first child, a son, was born in 1970. And so I taught in St. Paul for 2 years, and then Glendive, Montana, that last year. And if I had taught, I taught till June 5th, and he was born the morning of June 7th.
Oh, wow.
Finished the year. And if I had been in St. Paul still, I would have had to quit when I was showing, when I showed that I was pregnant. But in Montana, as you might guess, a little bit more independent-minded out there, it was up to the principal, and he let me teach.
But the policy in the 70s then in St.
1970, yeah.
was if you were a woman teacher and pregnant and you started to show,
You were done.
that was it.
Yeah.
I don't know about Alyssa, but I'm just like, phew,
Yep.
right? And I did get some of this insight working with the St. Paul Police Department. Is the first generation women officers talked about this, is just to become an officer, but the minute that they got pregnant, you were pulled, like you can't do the job, and how that has changed, so it's so interesting.
And if you wanted, usually when you had your children, then you were done working or done working for then. There was really no good daycare like there is now. It'd have to be grandma or an aunt or a neighbor or something like that. But so I stayed home basically for 13 years and raised my children, and actually it was a wonderful time. Yeah. I loved raising my children, and there were a lot of women home. We'd have coffee parties and little women's groups and things that
Well, and I want to, for listeners, for myself, is, in that time frame, a single income could support a family.
Yes.
And that's changed in America.
That's true.
The statistical of what more livable wage jobs were available, and you could have one that could support a family.
Yeah.
So that you could stay home. And then there's different authors that write about how social capital has declined over the years. And there's numerous things that has happened. The taking care of each other has declined. But they talk about, having both parents out of the household, there's no one to get together with in the community again, and build that.
Yeah, I don't
taking
think you
careness
have the
piece.
energy for that
Oh,
as much
right.
if you're both working and both.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Both
and
working,
have children,
yeah,
yes.
and have children, and that we're much more mobile. It used to be you worked, played, went to school in one area, statistically speaking again. And now how our kids might go to school over here, we might work over here, we might live over here.
Right.
So it's a much more mobile. So you don't have that getting together for coffee and getting
Yeah.
to know each other. I think we've talked about, we enjoy and find our neighborhood, because we live in a horseshoe, so
A
it's like
defined.
this defined little neighborhood, but people get to know each other, and I've really appreciated that, because I come from a neighborhood that we knew each other because we had to survive, to stay safe, but that when we talk to other folks, they don't have that. The folks who've lived in the same neighborhood for 30 years and are like, yeah,
Don't know their neighbors.
right? And, so over the time, how that's changed. So some of the things I hear with your conforming, I'm like, oh, it's like I couldn't have done that. But then there's also, I see beautiful gifts that we've lost because we don't operate that way anymore either,
And I, thinking about all of this too, I think there's good in all times and there's bad in all times. It's
Absolutely.
never perfect.
Right.
And, but anyway.
But that's a good thing for us to remember when we're talking across generational lines, is that every generation has brought forth some beauty, and every generation has, we've done some harm.
Failed.
Yeah, failed. Yeah, you go like
Failed.
that, failed. And if we start talking across generational lines with that in common, that would, I think, help us, rather than pointing out, you guys did this,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Well, then, after those 13 years, I had the opportunity to teach English as a second language, so I got to teach English to adults.
I love
And-
it. Your
and
dream came true.
My dream came true, 4 days a week, and I loved that job. It was all mine. It wasn't mine as a wife or a mother, and it's what I loved. It was all mine. And I learned so much because of my students. Now when first I had, the Southeast Asians, and then Russian Jews after perestroika, and then Russian Pentecostals, and then a smattering of
Different
every
folks from
everybody. And so I still think of my students when I just have so much to do getting ready for something. I think of them. They did it and came to school and just, and I learned that there is something good in every culture.
Again.
And
every culture has some shortcomings, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And yes.
Yeah.
And so it has just helped me see life.
That experience.
And I've traveled to a lot of those countries just because I
that's-
wanted to see them.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. I didn't know that. That's beautiful. And then the resiliency of people is what I hear you saying. You would think when
Yes.
you thought you had it hard, you could think of your students who, hey, they're going through a lot of the same stuff, plus they're trying to learn a language in a new country. And yeah, that has been my experience definitely too with people coming to America. It's like, oh my goodness, working so hard to not only just provide, but then also adjusting to the language and the culture. But there's something you said there I want you to reflect on, and that was all mine. So I don't know, what are your thoughts about that? Because I look back and I think about your generation, my mom's generation. They were always somebody's wife, they were somebody's mother, but they were very rarely looked at as just an individual.
Exactly. In the church cookbooks, you would be, Mrs. So-and-so last name, your husband's last name.
Yeah.
Yep.
How do you think that affected you as a person, or your generation? Because I look back and I'm like, I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have done what my mom was always. She was always being a wife, or she was always being a mother, and those roles meant taking care of things for other people.
That's right.
But there was nothing that she has for her own identity. And I have been doing things that are about what I do. They're about my identity. So
Yeah. I know you're saying that that's true. That's all true. And I think that our silent generation, we would think it would be selfish. Yeah. Wow. If you don't be selfish, don't think just about yourself. You have these other people to help.
And now women that are listening to this, is this maybe where our guilt comes from sometimes? You know, I said how there's residue. So even though our roles have very much changed, but I know a lot of women, we sometimes have guilt of, oh, I'm not a good enough mom, or I'm not good enough at my work, or I'm not good enough at this thing. And one piece of that might be because as historically as women, we were always givers and doers for others.
Exactly.
And then your answer is, because if you were to do it for yourself, it'd be selfish.
Yeah.
And so our generations are trying to do it for ourselves, and then if we're not doing well at it, we feel shame right away. That's so interesting.
But I think too, like when people say, well, you know, you have to take care of yourself first. And I think, do you really? You know?
I almost lost my water on that. Any good Midwesterner would be like, do I really? But
do you
then
really?
A female from your generation, you'd be like, yeah, no, you don't. Because you spent a lot of years not taking care of your, that's so interesting.
You would say that too. But yeah, I would still say, better to give to others.
Better to give to others. Wow.
Yeah.
Because that's what you did. So much of your experience was giving to others.
Yeah, not that I was successful at all of it, but I mean that was more important than it's interesting too along that line in teaching ESL. I would have women that for the first time they could have a job and money.
Wow.
And they loved it. That
freedom.
That freedom.
And that part of it, that identity.
And their money.
Yeah.
And their,
And I want to just
So I guess we all need a little of that, don't we?
Absolutely. We all have to have that. And have it, and then, but also have balance. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So then we come from a place of females giving and not having their own identity, and then you have baby boomers later with the 60s saying, hey, no, we're going to be free. We're going to break all this conformity. And then, more power coming to women in the 80s. But we sometimes forget, I think, two things, is the residue that is still there because all of this existed, and that it wasn't that long ago. So like you said, women that were learning English were coming from other countries and for the first time had the opportunity to have money. But what was it? I got to look at my notes. In 1972, it wasn't until 1972 that medical doctors up until then could refuse a woman birth control. Well, and there wasn't even birth control, in the 50s for women. And then 1972, banks didn't have to could refuse a married woman their own account. And I know Alison Bovair talks about that in the book, that she hadn't, her and her husband weren't together for like 3 years, and she was raising her children, but she couldn't open an account. She couldn't get a loan. She had an opportunity to buy a house, and she couldn't get it without her husband's signature. And like when she tell me that, I'm like, why would you need a signature?
See, I didn't experience that because I didn't try.
You didn't even try.
I didn't try to open an account. I mean, we had a joint account.
Oh, so you didn't have to.
I mean, everybody just had a joint account.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't that something? So then you could, not the right phrase, but you could get the benefits of that privilege because you were married to a male.
Right.
But if you weren't, then that policy really would hinder.
Right.
Yeah. So Darlene, what have you learned from your experience the takeaways?
Well, I think from all of my life's experience, I've learned that everything has good in things you want to correct or change in each time. And I think I've learned compassion, getting away from that judgment and conformity by my experiences of teaching, reading, having good neighbors like you who write books.
There you go. And traveling, I'm sure
traveling,
that
right? Yeah, we've traveled quite a bit, and I try to be open to everything. We have 11 grandchildren. They teach us a lot.
Absolutely.
But I was telling Judy, one of my favorite quotes is, "It's hard to hate someone up close." And as a person who, now I didn't know about triangles till Jody taught me, and I still need to learn a lot more. But I've been, I don't know if the word is fortunate through life or whatever, but I mean, I've had an easier life because my only down triangle is being a woman.
As being female.
Being a woman. I said, now I'm older, I've got two.
Now,
They're retired and the age triangle down, but and I think too that this makes me aware that there are going to be people you're not going to like and you're not going to agree with, but it shouldn't be because their triangles are different from you.
There you go.
It should, and you have to be open to that and listen. And I hope that I can do that and talk my grandchildren, make my grandchildren more aware too. And
and having these rich conversations. And I want to say thank you for sharing your experience, because it helps. It just helps myself, and I think the listeners remember the differences. And like you said, that the differences don't mean deficit, and differences don't mean bad. There's good and beautiful things and areas of growth in every generation, you know. And I love that phrase of, it's hard to hate someone up close. And that's ultimately what the book is about, is the urgency of awareness. Because right now in the world, we see a lot of hate, a lot of name calling, and the more we can become aware of each other and our own experiences and be open to hearing about others, the more we can have these beautiful dialogues. Which, like you said, doesn't mean we always agree, you know.
Right.
We don't always agree, but we can walk away.
Be open.
Yeah, be open and walk away thinking about what the other person said and why they said it, maybe why they went through it. Like, it's helped me a lot just to hear about the emphasis on conforming. And it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Oh, totally, yeah.
That's so in your DNA. Like, you are so like, oh, I've experienced you like that. Like, oh, I'll take care of that, or I'll, you know. And it's like, well, that's part of almost your DNA, because was the emphasis, you know. So I just appreciate your time, and listeners, I just want to say thank you, because again, you could have been anywhere else, but you chose to be with us, and hopefully, our Darlene and I gave you some things to think about, so we can start to have richer conversations across generational lines. With that, keep going out, having experiences that bring awareness. We can build our capacity, and we can change things individually in our relationships, in our institutions, and in our communities.